The parasha begins with Hashem chastising Moshe Rabbeinu. Moshe Rabbeinu challenges Hashem. Why did you send me? Me'oz basi el pari, since I came to Pari, Heira la'am hazeh. It's only gotten worse. V'hatze lo hisalta. You promised that I'm going to be the vehicle through which the Jewish people are going to be taken out of Mitzrayim. Clearly it's not so. And Hashem responds at the beginning of this week's parasha with very sharp words. Vayidaber Elokim el Moshe, Vayomer Elov, Ani Hashem. And in these words lie a very, very important message. Vayidaber Elokim el Moshe. And Hashem spoke strongly, strong words. Elokim is the name of HaKadosh Baruch Hu that reflects Midas Hadin, his concealed presence. That he's the Balei Acholos, he's the one who behind the scenes is making everything happen. Vayomer Elov. And he said to him, Ani Hashem, I am Hashem. And as we are familiar, Hashem is the name of HaKadosh Baruch Hu that's revealed, where his presence is recognizable. It's the name of Chesed. Ani Hashem. Don't be fooled by the apparent concealment of my presence. Ani Hashem. And that's a message that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is constantly giving over to Moshe from the Mara Hasneh. HaKadosh Baruch Hu shows him at the burning bush that even though the bush is burning with fire, but the sneh einenu ukol, in that fire lies my love, my kindness. My hand is extended to the Jewish people, that even in the fires of Egypt, even in the Golus of Egypt, my love is there behind the scenes, and I'm sustaining them and ensuring that they will come to the realization of the Geula. And so Hashem says to Moshe Rabbeinu, when Moshe Rabbeinu says, when they ask me, the Jewish people are going to ask me, Ma Shmoi, what's his name? Ma Oima Aleim, what should I say to them? Ma Shmoi. How are we to grasp a HaKadosh Baruch Hu that brings about such a holocaust, such a challenge in Egypt? Ma Shmoi, what's his name? How are we to relate to him? How's he manifesting himself? And Hashem says, Moshe, tell them, Eke Asher Eke. That's my name. I will be that I will be. And as Rashi tells us, I will be with them in this exile, and I will be with them in future exiles. I'm there, behind the scenes. And Moshe Rabbeinu, as Rashi tells us, says, Hashem, now you're talking about future exiles? They're overwhelmed, they're crushed. And so Hashem says to him, tell them, Eke shalachani aleichem. Eke shalachani aleichem. And we seem to have difficulty. We need to have difficulty with this. What does that mean? I will be. Eke. I will be. That who has sent you. Eke. Now we're holding here at the end of the Golus. It's the final chapter. Hashem is instructing Moshe Rabbeinu to go back to Egypt and take the Jewish people out of Egypt. The 210 years that's finally drawn to a close. Hashem should have said, Hayisi, I was, past tense. What's Ehyeh? I will be. And the Sforim say something very beautiful and very important. Hashem is telling Moshe Rabbeinu that in this Golus, in this exile, and in all future exiles that are really reflected in Golus Mitzrayim, I'm yearning to take away the curtain. Eke, I'm desirous of revealing myself. I want you to know that when Klal Yisrael are in Tsar or in Sorah, in Golus, anytime a Jew is in pain, the Gemara tells us, what does Hashem say? Kolani miroishi, kolani mizroi. Whoa, I experience such pain in my head, such pain in my arm. I feel that pain. Tell them, I'm waiting to reveal myself. I will be. Just hold on, because the end is coming. I remember when I was a young boy of 8 or 9 years old, my parents got a new a bread cutting machine or a meat slicing machine, a hand machine. And I woke up early Sunday morning. I was very excited to cut the bread with it. And instead of cutting the bread, I cut my big thumb. and I was screaming in pain, and I ran upstairs. My father came down, and he saw it was a serious cut, and he bandaged it as best as he could. He rushed me into the car and took me off to the hospital. There was a hospital a couple of miles away from my house, not much of a hospital, closed down a couple of years later. It was a hospital, the Jewish hospital. And you can imagine, he took me into the emergency room early Sunday morning. Weren't any really experienced, skilled doctors there. There was an immigrant doctor in his residency probably. And he looks at my finger and he says, yeah, sure, this needs stitches. We don't need to give you local anesthesia over here. We'll just stitch it up. It'll be over with soon. I was petrified. My father was waiting there just outside in the room, in the waiting room, and they take me into this cubicle and they start stitching my finger. I screamed. I yelped. I remember giving such a piercing scream. The walls shook. And I came out all shaken, and I saw my father was crying. And he took me by the arm, he took me by the hand, he took me in the car, and he said, when you were crying, my heart totally went out. I was just waiting to be able to take you. I was feeling so much pain. And I realized afterwards in that story, my father didn't express himself emotionally to me. But at that moment, it confirmed and affirmed to me something very essential. That even though my father was behind the curtain, he couldn't see. He wasn't there, it wasn't visible, and I'm being subjected to this terrible treatment, but he's feeling the pain. Later on, when he reveals himself, I recognize retroactively that really he was there all the time, and it was all for my good, and he knew he had to experience it. When the Jewish people were finally given the Torah, everything is for the purpose of Klal Yisrael receiving the Torah. And the Pasukim at the end of Mishpatim describe the events surrounding the giving of the Torah. And it says there that HaKadosh Baruch Hu was at Matan Torah, Vayiru es Elikei Yisrael. The Jewish people saw Elikei Yisrael, V'sachas raglov, beneath his feet, K'ma'asei livnas hasapeh, u'ke'etzem hashamayim l'Torah. Beneath his feet was a footstool of sapphire, a big brick of sapphire stone, and the clarity of the heavens sparkled in purity. Ke'etzem hashamayim l'Torah. And as Chazal tell us that HaKadosh Baruch Hu, they saw HaKadosh Baruch Hu in the pain of exile, in the middle of Elokim, of judgment. The Jewish people were building the bricks, and the children were being squelched and killed in between the bricks. That's the Maaseh Livnas Hasapir. And then they saw that Hashem, when he was revealed, it's Ke'etzem Hashemaim L'Torah. There are times where we see HaKadosh Baruch Hu with such clarity, and it's all one. His footstool, the manner in which his presence trickles to us and comes to us, is in these both forms, and they're both one. Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem Echad. But the commentaries point out something very interesting. Why, if the bricks and the difficulty and the terrible torture that the Jewish people were subjected to in Egypt, why is that represented in sapphire stone? K'maiseh livnas hasapir. And if we think about it, we note that at the Seder, we have a mitzvah of Sipur Yitzias Mitzrayim. The Torah Sofas, the Slonimus Forum say, why is it called Sipur Yitzias Mitzrayim? We have to retell and make it beautiful, the Yitzias Mitzrayim. Sipur miloshen sapir v'yaholem. It's like a diamond. It's like sapphire stone. It has to be taken out of the ground and polished and cleansed. And when you polish it, the shine and all the different refractions come out. And when we talk about Yitzias Mitzrayim, we're not simply talking about the exodus and the delight of Hashem taking us out. We're recognizing that in the Elokim, the Vayedaba Elokim is an Ani Hashem. It's all kindness. Hashem is waiting behind the curtain and yearning and desiring to take us out. His love is there. It's just a concealed love. It's just a hidden love. And the Meshech Chochmah, famous Meshech Chochmah in Pashas Bo, says the most wondrous thing. He says, Hashem said to Moshe Rabbeinu at the burning bush, you want to know my name? He says to him at the snare, it's Eheya, Asher Eke. And you take that word, Aleph, Hey, Yud, Hey, we see it adds up to the number 21. And the 2 times, there's an Eke and there's an Eke, it's 2 times 21. In completion, in totality, that's the Shem Membeis, the name of Hashem in its full totality, in its absolute representation. The holy name of Hashem, the Shem B'miloi that was expressed by the Kohen Gadol in the Lifnai V'Lifnim on Yom Kippur. And it's split. In this world, there is one Eheya and there's another Eheya. There's 2 types of Eheya. And he says it reflects, there are 2 tefillin that we wear, and the name of Hashem is brought 21 times in the tefillin. There's a tefillin on the head. V'ro kol amei ha'oretz ki shem Hashem nikra alecha. That's when the whole world sees a reflection of our greatness and our glory, and we can see Hashem ke'etzem hashamayim l'toha. And then there is a tefillin that we put on our hand, on our arm, that's concealed, that's hidden. There's a Shem Chof Aleph, half of Hashem's name. There's a presence of Hashem in this world that's not visible. We understand if you look at the arm where we put the tefillin, that's the muscle that makes the hand move. You know, when Hashem took us out of Egypt, we talk about the very fascinating, in a metaphoric sense, obviously. Hashem takes us out with a yad hachazaka and a zroya netuya, with a strong hand and an outstretched arm. 2 concepts. What does that mean? The strong hand and the outstretched arm. And what's reflected is there's a yad hagdola, like the Jewish people saw at the Yam Suf. Klal Yisrael saw the Yad Hagdola, Hashem b'Mitzrayim. When Hashem is completely visible, the hand, when it grasps something, it molds. It's a craftsman that works with his hands. You see his hands directly creating something and seeing something. That's the name of Hashem that's visible. But the hand only operates because it's connected to the trunk of the body with an arm and a muscle that is moving and shaping. It's the engine, it's the transmission, if you will, to some degree. And there too we understand that they go together in Hashem's visible and apparent recognition, when we can see him with love and kindness, when he's flowing with all his goodness and we see him ke'etzem hashamayim l'toha, we know at the same time, and we're filling up our storage tanks, that when he's not visible and when all we see is, we don't see any hand, all we see is din, but we know that behind the scenes it's his arm, he's there and he's waiting to stretch out his hand. And really, if we look carefully, we will see even now his kindness extends to us because he's sustaining us and leading us to the time where he'll finally be able to part the curtain and reveal his presence. It's a very, very beautiful and deep thought, because it's the essence. If you read last week's parasha, the beginning of this week's parasha, it's the essence of our avoda in Golus. Zeh shmi la'olam, v'zeh zichri l'dor v'dor. This is my name, la'olam. And Chazal tell us la'olam. My name is concealed. It's not visible. You can't see it. Sometimes it's just the one eke that's shalachani aleichem. But there's an eke asher eke. It really flows together. We understand that very soon it will be visible, and we'll understand how everything is integrated and everything comes together. That's the zichri, that's what brings the zachar, the hashpa'ah, all the divine flow, l'dor v'dor, from generation to generation until I can be totally revealed. We have to know that it's all flowing from one source. Last week we talked about a very important concept, how we're all looking for a skula. We're all looking for different ways that we can see and feel HaKadosh Baruch Hu's loving hand. We can connect to him. And we talked about the skula for Hamtokas Hadinim, reflecting and pondering on the bracha of Shehakol Nihiyeh Bidvarei. Hashem is instilling and animating everything every second. And when we make that bracha, it's an opportunity to acknowledge, recognize, and absorb the message that Shehakol Nihiyeh Bidvarei. I want to share with you a little bit of a deeper thought and something very practical that we can all undertake that helps us recognize that b'chol tzarosim lo tzar, in every tzar, in every tzara, in every constraint, lo tzar, HaKadosh Baruch Hu is there. He's waiting. Vayinatlem vayinasim ad olam. He's waiting to grasp us in our hands and lift us up and give us direct. And that has to be our bakasha. We have to be thinking when things are tight and tough and difficult and constrained, we say, I know Hashem, you're just behind the curtain and you're waiting to embrace me. They say a story of one of the great Magidim, I don't recall who, said a story to give this mamashos so we can relate to it. Said there was once a fellow who passed away, and he left behind a wife, an almana, with a young child. She had to care for this. She had to look after and take care of this young child. She was 8, 9 years old. This little child realized that there's no money at home. He was desperate for money. Tried to sell some cookies on the street, tried to sell some apples. It wasn't enough to keep their family going. And there was a very, very wealthy, stingy, miserly man in town. And he went to this man. This was a town that was on the edge of the ocean. It was near the ocean. He went to this rich man. He lived in a beautiful palace right near the water. And he goes into his mansion and he says, please, can you help me? You know, my father passed away. My mother's hungry. We're at home. We're starving. Can you give us some money? The man was a very cruel man. And he said to him, you know what? I'll tell you, I'll give you very nice money. I'll give you 10 ducats, 10 gold ducats, but on one condition. You spend from dusk to dawn in the water of the ocean. It was a cold, wintry time of the year. And he said, if you go into the ocean and you, till your shoulders, you walk into the ocean and you stay there the whole night. Now, of course, you know, the hypothermia, that's a very dangerous proposition. But the kid says, you know, I'm desperate. We're desperate. We don't have any bread. So either way, it doesn't look like the prospects are too rosy. I'll do it. And the mother said, no, don't do it. Please don't endanger yourself. He said, no, we have to. And he told the rich man he's going to do it Tuesday night. And sure enough, right before the sun dips under the horizon, takes off his clothes, he goes into the water. It's freezing cold, he's shivering. And his mother's at home. His mother says, "Ay, my poor son, she's davening." She takes out a tehillim. She's crying. And then she goes to the back of the house. She gathers together some firewood and sticks and twigs. And she goes to the seashore on the edge of the sea. And she sees her son in the water. She feels so bad for him, enduring such terrible cold. And she makes a fire on the sand. She makes a little fire. And so he's looking at the warm fire. And she's sending him a message. I'm just waiting for you to come out of the water and warm yourself. It's going to be ready. The second you come out, it's going to be ready. And he's warming himself a little bit in his mind, obviously. The rich man comes out of his mansion and he sees everything. The next morning, the boy came out and his mother took a hold of him and dried him down and dressed him and made sure that he was warm and brought him home and gave him to eat and to drink. And he went to the rich man's house to collect the 10 gold ducats. And the rich man says to him, "What do you mean? I didn't bargain for that. I meant you should go into the cold water and stay there. Your mother was making a fire on the shore there. That's not what we meant." The child was so devastated. He felt so terrible. "What do you mean? After I endured this incredible, I put my life in danger. I almost died. You're not going to give me anything? What, are you crazy? We're going to go to the Rav." Okay, he calls him to the Rav, and the Rav starts talking to this very wealthy man, very rich man, and the Rav says to him, it was very cold. The Rav made sure the windows were open in his room. It was freezing cold. And the Rav says, "You know what, let me make you a cup of tea. I'll make you a warm cup of tea." And the fellow's shivering. He says, "Please, make me a cup of tea." And the Rav brings in the samovar, and he brings the fire, and he fills the samovar with water, but instead of putting the fire underneath the samovar, he puts it next to it on the side. And they're talking and talking. The fellow says, "You know, maybe we could have the cup of tea." So he says, "Well, the water isn't ready." And the rich man looks around and he says, "Well, of course it isn't ready. The fire isn't under the samovar." So he says, "That's right. The fire isn't under the samovar. It doesn't warm. So too, the fire isn't there in the water." He endured it. We endured the challenges of Golus, the cold, frigid seemingly distant, but we know Hashem is shining a light to us in the distance and is showing us He really is waiting for the curtain to part. We just have to be warmed by its fire, be looking towards HaKadosh Baruch Hu and recognizing that Ani Hashem is there, He's waiting to reveal Himself. It may be a Vayedaber Elokim, but really it's an Ani Hashem. And we have a way that we can warm and connect ourselves. One of the greatest challenges we face is B'zeh Sapecha Tochel Lechem. Everybody in some which way experiences the tsar, the min hameit tsar, of being a provider, of having one's needs met, providing for one's family, for one's own needs, for one's children. And the Sfarim tell us a tremendous segula, to be able, in the tsar, in the meitzah, to be able to see and be warmed by the fire and be able to connect to the heavenly flow and be able to sustain oneself even in challenging times. And that is to say Birchas Hamazon. Say Birchas Hamazon, millah b'millah, word for word, from the bencher, from the siddur. It's a tremendous skula. And I'll explain it a little bit. But let me share with you this story. There was a fellow in Yerushalayim. They say, he told us so about 30 years ago. There's a fellow in Yerushalayim who davened in the Hat Tzvi Shul. It's right on Rehov Tzefania there, near Geula. Very famous, a landmark shul. And he was a Holocaust survivor, davened there in the shul. And there was something interesting about this, that over the years people realized and recognized, normally we don't see how people bench, because they bench in the privacy of the kitchen, of the living room. But he, sometimes you hear before Pesach they had a communal meal. People couldn't have chametz in the house. On the sukkahs, you hear from one sukkah to the other. This fellow took his benching so seriously. He's a regular person, but his benching, every word was carefully enunciated from the siddur. It was beautiful to hear. And someone asked him once. He said, Reb Shimon, his name was Shimon. He said, Reb Shimon, why do you take the Birchas Hamazon so seriously? And he said, let me tell you why. He said he was 11 years old in Poland. He was learning in Cheder. And Reb Meir Shapiro came to VaEra, his class, his kitta. And everybody knew very well. And Reb Meir Shapiro said, you know what, boys, before I leave, let me give you a prize. A little prize for your hitztainus, because you know the Gemara so well. I want to share with you a very important idea, and if you take this, you'll realize this is a hidden gift, a special gift. And he told them over the words of the VaEra Heitev, Siman Kuf Pei Aleph. The VaEra Heitev brings it from the Chinuch. It says, if a person says Birchas Hamazon, millah b'millah, every word, carefully, said there's mezainos of Ksuvin Loi, HaKadosh Baruch Hu will ensure that all their needs will be taken care of, the pipeline is secure, there'll be a flow of HaKadosh Baruch Hu's bracha to the person. And especially if it's said mitoch hasiddur, from within, word for word. I heard that. I was a little child at the time. I said, listen, I think I could do that. I'm going to do that. Not long after, the war broke out. And we went from one place to the other. Eventually, I was found from my bunker and taken in for a selection. I was very careful. If I couldn't say Birchas Hamazon slowly and carefully, I didn't eat bread. And with Mesiras Nefesh, whenever I ate, I said Birchas Hamazon very, very carefully, word for word. And I was secure. HaKadosh Baruch Hu, always somewhere or other I was provided for. He said when a selection came, I was moved to the right, and I was moved to a labor camp. When we came to the labor camp, the commandant asked us, we stood in the line, and everybody was asked, what's your profession? I didn't have any profession. What was I, a kid? If I made myself look very tall, very important, there was a fellow behind me that whispered to me, say that you're a butcher, and say that I'm your assistant. So he told the commandant, I'm a butcher. And he got a job with this other fellow in the kitchen, the camp kitchen. And so all his mezainos, all his needs were taken care of. He was able to subsist comfortably on the food, the scraps of food over there. After a while, a new German commandant came and took charge of the kitchen. And this fellow was extremely cruel, and it bothered him so much that this little Jewish kid, doesn't look like an emaciated skeleton. He's comfortable there in the kitchen, and he said to him, here, He gave him a hoe, a little shovel, a hand shovel, and he said to him, took him outside the back door, and he showed him a patch of land outside the kitchen, and he said to him, I want you to dig here a bunker that we can hide in if the Russians bomb. Dig us a bunker, 8 feet by 8 feet, and make it so many feet deep, and if you do it within 2 hours, then I'll let you work in the kitchen. If not, you're out. Of course, it was an impossible task. Like such a vicious, such a wickedness. It was impossible. He stood there with his hoe. What's he going to do? He's going to even start. What's he going to do? He's going to try. And he said, I stood there for a little while, and then a group of really wicked soldiers came by, Nazi guards, and they must have had a bag of potatoes and turnips or something, and they saw me. They were maybe a little old. They saw me there. And for some reason, they thought I would be good for target practice for their throwing. And they started throwing at me these vegetables, throwing at me. And I was ducking this way, that way. I was being hit from all sides. It was very painful. But as they moved on, they were laughing, deep, raucous laughter. They were having fun throwing all these vegetables at me. And I was left there with a big pile of vegetables. I put them together and I stood next to the pit. 20 minutes, half an hour later, there were a group of Polish prisoners of war that were being walked by to their barracks. And they saw me standing next to this whole pile of vegetables. They thought I'm looking after these potatoes and vegetables. So they came over to me and they said, please, can we have? We're starving. And I said to them, they're big burly, they were coming back from working outside, they had shovels. I said to them, listen, if you dig me a pit so many feet deep and so long, in an hour, I'll give it to you. And sure enough, they dug the pit right away. They were strong, they threw it out. It was all over and done within half an hour. He had the pit and he gave them the vegetables and he stood there. And then he went back into the kitchen, he called the commandant and he said, look, I dug it for you. The fellow was like astonished. He said, I knew that this is God's people. This is miraculous. This is God's people. He let him work in the kitchen, and he was able to remain till the end of the war. He was able to eat comfortably. And he says he knows it was in the schus of him keeping Birchas HaMazon word for word, millah b'millah. He used to say it very carefully. We look at the words of Birchas HaMazon, we realize we're not just thanking Hashem for food. We're thanking Hashem for everything. We're acknowledging He's the source. He gives us everything. Everything is enunciated there. And let's look at the third brach, the Rachim, the brach of Bnei Yerushalayim that was established, Chazal tell us, by David HaMelech and Shlomo HaMelech. We say to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Rachim no. Have Rachmanas, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Al Yisrael Amecha, Val Yishlayim Yirecha. We want to be able to see your presence. I'll see you in Mishkan Kvodecha. Val Malchus Bestov Mishichech. Val Abayas HaGod VaKadosh. Shenikra Shimcha Olav. Reveal yourself. Elikenu. Avinu. We understand that there's an Elikenu. Your presence is concealed, but we know that you're Avinu, you're our Tati, and you desire to give us Re'enu, Zunenu, Fanasenu. We ask for everything. And listen to these words, because these words are difficult to understand, but we say them all the time. We should say them, We rush through the Birchas HaMazon. Sometimes we don't think. Sometimes we don't have time for Birchas HaMazon, so we grab a mazonas, we grab a little bite to eat, and we're on the run. But really, if we eat and sit down and say Birchas HaMazon properly, it's an incredible opportunity to connect to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. We say HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Let us not need. Don't make us needful. Not to the gift of humans, and not to their loans. Ki'im, only but to your hand that is open, that is holy, that is wide. We should never be embarrassed. We should never be shamed. We should never be humiliated forever and ever. It's very fascinating. We really should say Ki'im miyadcha. We shouldn't need we shouldn't need to come on to gifts from people or loans. Ki'im miyadcha, only from your hand directly. We shouldn't need any intermediary. We don't say that. We say Ki'im liyadcha, only to you. Ki'im liyadcha, only to your hand. And what we're saying really is, we don't know how HaKadosh Baruch Hu provides for us. HaKadosh Baruch Hu could provide in any way. But we should recognize our prayer, our davening is Ki im le yadecha, that instead of davening for this to help and that to help and this to happen and that to happen, we just want to be connected to you. Le yadecha. We want to see your hand that's revealed. We don't need a concealed presence. It will be sustained directly from you. This Yid saw the direct divine intervention of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, because it was part of his tefillah, Ki im liyadcha. I want to be able to see that it's directly from you. I'm holding on to your hand. I'm looking towards your hand. I'm waiting for your curtain to part. Just like we believe and we know, and this is part of our tefillah, we know Hashem is waiting to part that curtain. Shchina ma'umeres, when a person is betzad, the Shchina says, I'm in such pain. I'm just waiting to grab you and to lift you up and to give you. When we focus on that, and we daven for that, then we'll experience too that special connection, even in the Meitzah. Min ha-Meitzah korosika, ononi b'merchav ka, we'll be able to see not his roya, not his hidden presence, but him in the most revealed way. Good Shabbos.